we are talking about Swiss regulators and Credit Suisse. Swiss regulators said that if they allowed Credit Suisse to go bankrupt, it would have crippled the country's economy and would have resulted in a full-scale bank run. The Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority and the Swiss Central Bank brokered a takeover of the troubled lender by UBS in a $3.3 billion deal that was announced in March. UBS Chairman Colm Keller says he's confident that the takeover will reduce costs, benefit shareholders, and support Swiss finance. Adam, I'm kicking this one right off to you. Two major banks here merging at the direction of government because a big bank outside the US is failing. I think there are a lot of different ways we can go with this, but I would love to hear your initial take on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting story because it's not often that you hear government officials getting out there and actually telling the truth about what's going on. The reality of it is that this probably was systemic and existential to the Swiss banking system. Again, like the banking system doesn't have a lot of big players, and this was one of sort of the real behemoths that existed there, a systemically important institution, not just to the country, but to the world in many ways. So the kind of part that goes unsaid in that statement in the way that it's said is that that's a failure of regulators in an enormous capacity that is hard to quantify, right? If you're saying that, hey, we had to do this, we had no choice, otherwise the systemic, otherwise this could be something that affects the entire country, that is an indictment of regulators not doing their job and not preventing the creation of these entities that can present this type of existential risk. So I think it is a correct statement. I think that the part that is unspoken is the important part. And I also think that, again, like what tends to happen is that regulators will say, oh, well, these are the rules we're putting in to prevent a crisis. And then a crisis happens anyways, even with those rules in place. And they say, well, we just need more power to prevent these type of crises. And in practice, that doesn't actually ever solve the problem. It just, again, concentrates power in ways that then create these distortions, which then create the need for these types of government responses. So it's really one of those situations where, in classic, American libertarian fashion, like the government breaks your leg and then gives you a crutch and is like, okay, you should thank me for that because I'm helping you. But they created the core problem that is underlying all of this. And that remains very much true, not just in Switzerland, but also across the world, and especially in the United States, where this banking crisis really has its origins. Will?
Powerful metaphor. I felt that deeply in my leg. I think this is a fun part of the show where we always get to play like armchair roles as economists, and it's kind of like my favorite thing. The show's supposed to be about Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean we can stop ourselves from commenting on everything else in the world, and we will do that no matter what. So in this case, I do think there was probably some existential crisis along with the banking sector, right? We were seeing the domino effect. First it was Silvergate and how they had to voluntarily liquidate the entire bank, and then there was rumors about SVB. SVB went under, and then Signature, and then internationally, Credit Suisse has been sort of like under the gun for quite a while, right? This has been happening for months, and then all of a sudden, around these U.S. banks falling apart, this Swiss-based bank, which is very large, also fell apart in short order. And as we talked about on the show a few weeks ago, it seemed to be like a duration mismatch between different types of bond holdings. A lot of these banks hold bonds. When you put a deposit into the bank, they're not just going to sit on that. They're going to put that money to work on your behalf. Typically, they go and buy bonds because bonds are supposed to be safe. Just because it's safe doesn't mean you can't balance your book. A lot of these banks didn't do a good job with that, apparently. And so they had some mismatches and liabilities. And when people came back to pull their money out, pull those deposits back out, well, the banks were a little bit illiquid. And I think that is sort of the larger lesson here. I mean, with Credit Suisse itself, I won't pretend, and I won't go that far to say that I know all the intricacies of it, but that does seem to be like the general lesson here. Now let's like pull this back to like a Bitcoin thought, right? Like we got to bring it back to the wagons here. When it comes to government debt, there's a lot of questions around how they've been moving interest rates up and down the last few years. With Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency schemes, the idea is we don't have to deal with any of that, right? There's no politicians, there's no central board making these decisions. There's just Bitcoin going up and to the right, hopefully forever. And we don't have to like worry about any of these decisions that destroy banks within one evening. Jen, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity, Will. When the first bank collapsed in the US a few weeks ago, and I said, I'm just worried about what this indicates for the for the US and for the world. You told me you thought that this was a contained issue. And I just want to say that
Show me the clip.
Have escalated since then.
Show me the clip.
I will find it. I'll see you on Twitter. And this is worrying, right? So Credit Suisse is a 167-year-old bank. There's a quote in the article. They said the merger minimized risk of contagion and maximized trust, maybe in this small ecosystem. But I read this story and I lose more trust day after day when it comes to what's happening on a macroeconomic scale. And economists have been calling for a financial crisis for a long time. And I want to say, although we've seen a lot of things happen, we have not seen that financial crisis yet. And stories like this make me worried for what's to come. And I don't want to make everyone afraid. So Adam, take it from there and give us some hope as we go into the break.
Oh, you set me up perfectly there. Yeah. I mean, the reality of it is that the banking system, broadly speaking, is insolvent. We can talk about this as if it's a liquidity problem, but a lot of the problem actually has to do with solvency, which is just the way that the banking system works. Again, traditional fractional reserve banking in the way that it's practiced today is something where if even 25% of your depositors show up and actually want their cash, then you're in trouble. And so it's a lot less about who is actually solvent and who has done a good job of being a bank. And it's a lot more about who are people concerned is going to fail in the short term because of the systemic insolvency problems that appear to be pervasive throughout the industry. So when you talk about combining, like creating the most trust, what you're talking about is you're talking about taking something that is a failure, right? UBS was effectively in the process of failing and rolling it up into a bank that isn't in the process of failing. Did that make, thank you, Credit Suisse, not UBS. Apologies about that. So when you look at it from that perspective, like, you're not actually improving the quality of the bank that is being absorbed. You're not improving the quality of the bank that is doing the absorbing. What you're doing is you're preventing the failure of one by weakening the other. So again, Switzerland doesn't have a lot of big banks. So the fact that they rolled, their second largest bank up into their largest bank is not a cause for like reassurance. It means they have no place to roll it up should that entity fail besides the Swiss government itself, which already played a role in helping absorb losses that came from this. So no, again, we're at the end of this long cycle where failures have not been allowed. And as a result of that, the entire system at a structural level has been weakened over and over and over again. So we will get that crisis someday. And honestly, I hope we never do. But there's going to come a time, it seems, where they won't be able to prevent this. And that's when that crisis will really kind of emerge. But it's not a happy story, even today.